on New Year's Eve 2020 in a peaceful Florida home. Morgan Meeser suddenly woke to find a dark figure dressed as Batman standing by her bed. For a harrowing hour, she was bound, beaten, and strangled to near death. But when she recognized the attacker through his familiar breath, Morgan had to perform the most terrifying act of survival in her life to save herself. This was not just a violent assault, but the culmination of a decades-long campaign of psychological manipulation, where the line between love and control had been completely erased. To understand the horror of that New Year's Eve 2020, we must go back to the early 2000s, when two young people in Florida began what seemed like a perfect love story. Morgan Meeser grew up in a middle-class family in Florida, a beautiful girl with a natural talent for art and design from a young age. Morgan displayed exceptional creativity and was praised by family and friends for her gentle nature, kindness, and deep empathy for others. In high school, Morgan was an excellent student, well-liked, and considered one of the most popular girls. She lived just a few blocks from Rodney's house, and their fateful meeting occurred when she was only 14 at the time, when she was still forming her understanding of love and relationships. Morgan's positive traits, her compassion, patience, and tendency to help others, made her special. In psychology, people like Morgan are often called fixers, individuals who feel responsible for healing others' pain, often at the expense of their own needs. She always believed in the goodness of people, readily forgiving and offering second chances. However, this purity and lack of experience with toxic relationships left Morgan blind to early warning signs. When she met Rodney, she was at a vulnerable and impressionable age, something he would recognize and exploit from the very beginning. Rodney Meeser, 3 years older than Morgan, appeared outwardly like a normal, even charming young man in the early stages of their relationship. He knew how to present himself as thoughtful and romantic, showering Morgan with attention during their initial months of dating. Beneath this facade, however, lay a complex psyche with deep, unresolved issues. Rodney exhibited the classic traits of a skilled psychological manipulator, an ability to read others with precision, quickly identifying their weaknesses and exploiting them ruthlessly. With Morgan, Rodney saw her compassionate nature and tendency to help those she loved, particularly those in pain. In the early years of their relationship, he employed a tactic known as love bombing, showering her with gifts, planning romantic surprises, and making Morgan feel like the only woman in the world. It's critical to understand that this behavior stemmed not from genuine love, but from a calculated effort to create emotional dependency and establish control. Rodney had a pathological need for admiration and control. Unable to tolerate not being the center of Morgan's universe, psychology describes individuals like Rodney as having narcissistic personality disorder with psychopathic traits, lacking empathy, with a tendency to manipulate and no conscience when harming others. Notably, Rodney was adaptable, switching tactics when one method of manipulation ceased to work, keeping Morgan in a constant state of instability, never knowing which version of Rodney would appear. After the initial love-bombing phase, Rodney began employing subtler manipulation tactics. Within weeks, he gradually isolated Morgan from her friends by creating busy schedules and that left her no time for other relationships. This tactic was highly effective because it didn't appear as direct control. Instead, Morgan felt she was choosing Rodney out of love, unaware that her choices were being systematically manipulated. Morgan's family initially had no concerns about the relationship, viewing it as a typical teenage romance. Rodney was skilled at presenting himself as a polite, respectful young man in front of adults, creating a positive image that he would later exploit to discredit Morgan's accusations. In 2008, when Morgan was 20, Rodney proposed in a romantic ceremony. This proposal was not just an expression of love, but a critical step in his long-term control strategy. By making Morgan his wife, he created a legal and social commitment that made leaving the relationship far more difficult. Their 2010 wedding was a grand affair attended by family and friends. To outsiders, they appeared to be a perfect couple. However, immediately after the wedding, Rodney's mask began to slip. Moving to a private home in a quiet area was also part of Rodney's plan. The house was far from Morgan's family and friends, creating geographical isolation that made control easier. He justified it as an ideal place to raise children, a reason Morgan couldn't argue against. After marriage, Rodney's possessiveness became more overt. He closely monitored Morgan's activities, checking her phone and emails and questioning her about everyone she interacted with. Initially, Morgan mistook this as a sign of love and concern, a common mistake among victims of psychological abuse. In 2010, the death of Rodney's 19-year-old brother, Kevin, from leukemia marked a significant turning point in their relationship. This loss gave Rodney a perfect excuse to justify his increasingly extreme behaviors. Instead of seeking professional help or leaning on his wife for healthy support, Rodney weaponized his grief to control Morgan. He became bitter, angry, and emotionally volatile. But more importantly, he redirected all these negative emotions toward Morgan. Rodney began imposing increasingly strict rules on Morgan. She had to report all her activities, couldn't go anywhere without his permission, and endured relentless criticism. Morgan, with her gentle nature and tendency to heal others' pain, accepted these changes as a way to help her husband through his grief. She believed that with enough patience and love, Rodney would recover and return to the man she fell in love with. This is a common psychological error, the belief that love can change someone with deep-seated issues. Morgan's pregnancy in 2010 brought hope for a fresh start. They spent months preparing for their first child, decorating the nursery and buying clothes and toys. Rodney seemed gentler, and Morgan hoped fatherhood would transform him. Tragically, their son, born on March 15, 2011, was premature and suffered from a severe heart condition, requiring immediate ICU care. After 18 days of fighting, the baby passed away, leaving both parents with indescribable grief. Their son's death was not only a personal tragedy, but became a new tool for Rodney's manipulation. Instead of sharing the grief and supporting each other, he demanded that Morgan focus entirely on consoling him. He viewed his pain as more important, holding Morgan responsible for healing it. The baby's room was left untouched as a painful relic, and Rodney used it as a constant reminder of their loss. Whenever Morgan tried to discuss clearing the room to move forward, Rodney accused her of being callous and unloving toward their child. When Morgan became pregnant with twins 3 months later, both saw it as a blessing. However, Rodney used the pregnancy to tighten control, demanding that Morgan depend on him entirely, both emotionally and physically. When the twins were born healthy in April 2012, Morgan found a new sense of meaning and purpose. Caring for her children not only brought joy, but helped her recognize her own strength and capabilities. With her design and architecture degree, Morgan started an interior design business. What began as a way to earn extra income while raising her children quickly grew into a successful career. Morgan's natural talent, dedication, and ability to connect with clients earned her a strong reputation in the local community. Morgan hired Nicole, her high school best friend, as an assistant and later a business partner. This working relationship not only drove business success, but provided Morgan with emotional support and social connection she had been isolated from for years. Her business success gave Morgan something she didn't realize she had lost: confidence, financial independence, and, most importantly, a sense of self-worth. For the first time in years, she felt capable of achieving something without Rodney's approval. However, Morgan's success triggered a deep psychological crisis for Rodney. He had spent years building a system of control based on making Morgan believe she couldn't survive without him. Her professional success directly threatened this foundation. Rodney launched a systematic campaign to undermine Morgan's confidence. He constantly belittled her achievements, claiming she was merely lucky, lacked real talent, and that people would soon see through her. Morgan, earning more than him, became a constant source of tension in Rodney's mind. This not only challenged his traditional role as the family breadwinner, but also undermined his financial control, one of the most powerful tools of psychological abuse. Rodney also struggled to maintain his own job. His volatile personality and controlling tendencies led to conflicts with colleagues and superiors, creating a stark contrast with Morgan's success, fueling his jealousy and resentment. In 2019, when Morgan received a prestigious design award, it became a breaking point in their relationship. This was official recognition of her talent and hard work from the professional community, something Rodney couldn't dismiss or diminish. Instead of congratulating his wife, Rodney reacted with anger and envy. He accused Morgan of cheating or manipulating to win the award, or claimed the organizers only chose her for diversity optics. He used every tactic he could to tarnish her achievement. This event was a psychological turning point for both. For Morgan, it was the first time she truly realized her husband wasn't just unsupportive, but actively sabotaging her happiness. For Rodney, it was the moment he realized his old control methods were failing, and more extreme measures were needed. A month after receiving the award, during a weekend trip, Morgan finally found the courage to discuss divorce. This wasn't an impulsive decision, but the result of months of reflection and psychological preparation. Her professional success showed her she could be independent, and she began to see that her relationship with Rodney was not love, but abuse. Rodney's reaction fully exposed his true nature. For the first time, he resorted to physical violence, punching Morgan in the face, gripping her hands hard enough to leave bruises, and pushing her to the floor. When Morgan called her father to pick her up, Rodney immediately showcased his terrifying manipulation skills by denying the assault, accusing Morgan of self-harm to frame him. After this violent incident, Rodney launched a systematic manipulation campaign. He contacted Morgan's family and friends, spinning a distorted narrative where he was the victim of a wife trying to destroy their family. He used their twins as an emotional weapon, constantly reminding Morgan that divorce would harm the children and that she was a selfish mother. In September 2020, when Morgan officially filed for divorce, Rodney played his final and perhaps most effective card, faking a terminal illness. He fabricated emails from a medical clinic, sending Morgan diagnoses claiming he had the same disease that killed his brother and father. This choice of illness was no coincidence. Rodney exploited Morgan's deep pain over losing loved ones to illness. The tactic was terrifyingly successful. Morgan, with her compassionate heart, allowed Rodney to return home after he had moved to a nearby apartment. Rodney continued using the illness to maintain control. Whenever Morgan asked him to move out, he would suffer pain or weakness, making her feel guilty. On December 30th, 2020, Morgan finally found the strength to kick Rodney out for good. Notably, Rodney's response wasn't anger or pleading, but eerie calm as he packed and left. This calmness wasn't acceptance, but a sign of a premeditated plan. In the following days, Rodney made final preparations for his attack. His laptop search history revealed chilling terms: how to strangle someone to unconsciousness without killing them, how to disguise your voice to avoid recognition. He purchased zip ties, a Batman mask, and black clothing with cash to avoid a paper trail. Store footage showed these items were bought 3 days before the attack, proving it was meticulously planned. On New Year's Eve, 2020, Morgan was home alone, as the twins were at their grandparents'. She spent the evening with Nicole, drinking champagne to celebrate the end of a tough year, then returned home early, locking the doors and arming the alarm as usual. Around 3:30 a.m., as Morgan slept, Rodney executed his plan. He entered the house without triggering the alarm, likely through a basement window whose sensor he had tampered with before moving out. Morgan woke to find a dark figure in a Batman costume standing by her bed. The attacker, holding a gun and speaking in a distorted Batman voice, began a 1-hour ordeal of torture. He struck Morgan's head with the gun, punched her face, bound her hands with zip ties, stripped her clothes, and raped her twice. Particularly horrifying was the repeated strangulation. The attacker choked Morgan until she passed out, then released her to wake up, only to choke her again, a vicious form of psychological torture. Throughout, he threatened to kill Rodney, creating the illusion of a stranger with a vendetta against the family. However, Morgan recognized the attacker's identity through his distinctive breath and touch. Realizing it was Rodney, she performed the most critical act of her life, begging him not to kill Rodney, pretending to still care for her ex-husband, saying that, despite the divorce, she still loved him. This tactic worked. Rodney, with his pathological ego, was placated by Morgan's feigned concern, easing his rage and likely saving her life. After the assault, Rodney took a few items to stage a robbery, covered Morgan's head with a pillowcase, and dragged her to the back porch. He then fled the scene and returned to his role as a concerned husband, checking on his ex-wife. When police and paramedics arrived, they found a horrific scene. Morgan was severely injured, a concussion, broken ribs, bruises across her body, a swollen face, and one eye completely shut. Doctors confirmed she had been raped twice and strangled multiple times to near death. Investigators immediately noted inconsistencies. This didn't resemble a typical robbery, as only minor items were taken, while valuables like jewelry and electronics remained. The level of violence suggested a personal attack. Rodney's initial statement was full of contradictions. He claimed he couldn't sleep, saw a stranger in black write Morgan's name on a window, and came to check on her when she didn't answer his calls. However, police found no record of any calls that night. The investigation turned decisive when investigators searched Rodney's laptop. His search history revealed highly suspicious terms from the weeks leading up to the attack, indicating premeditation. Police discovered Rodney had systematically stalked Morgan, hacking her email and messages, taking covert photos of her at work, and installing tracking software on her phone. Store footage showed him buying zip ties with cash 3 days before the attack. Most damningly, surveillance from Rodney's apartment complex showed him leaving at midnight with a large bag and returning at 3 a.m. He then changed clothes and left again, likely to discover the attack at Morgan's house. Police found zip ties in Rodney's car identical to those used to bind Morgan. The home's alarm system showed a tampered basement window sensor. Morgan recalled Rodney visiting the basement multiple times before moving out, under the pretense of checking the electrical system. A suicide note found in Rodney's car detailed his plan to kill Morgan and then himself, but he claimed her reaction changed his mind. Even after his arrest, Rodney continued manipulating Morgan. He called from jail, asking her to come to the police station to protect him. Shockingly, Morgan initially complied, demonstrating the depth of his psychological manipulation, a phenomenon known as trauma bonding. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Rodney agreed to a partial plea deal to reduce his sentence. He pleaded guilty to charges of assault, battery, aggravated assault, intimidation, robbery, and illegal firearm possession. Even in his plea, Rodney minimized his responsibility, claiming he never intended to kill Morgan and that his actions stemmed from desperation and mental illness. This showed that, even when caught, he didn't fully acknowledge the cruelty of his actions. On August 4, 2021, Rodney Mazer was sentenced to 70 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. If released, he will face lifelong supervision. The harsh sentence reflected the severity of the crime and sent a clear message that society does not tolerate domestic violence and psychological abuse. For Morgan, the sentence brought a sense of justice, but couldn't erase the deep trauma. She underwent extensive therapy to recover and rebuild her trust in herself after years of manipulation. The 2 children now have to grow up without their father and carry the heavy burden of knowing what he did to their mother, a psychological weight they will have to cope with for the rest of their lives. The case of Rodney and Morgan Mazer became a case study in psychological abuse, showing that domestic violence isn't just physical, but can involve sophisticated, years-long systems of control. It highlighted the importance of recognizing warning signs: stalking, financial control, isolation from loved ones, and emotional manipulation. The case raised societal awareness about psychological abuse as a serious form of violence and inspired others in similar situations, proving that escaping an abusive relationship is possible, though incredibly difficult. This case is not just about a violent attack, but a comprehensive portrait of how psychological manipulation can destroy lives. It serves as a reminder that abusers are not always strangers, but can be those we love and trust most. Morgan's story also demonstrates the resilience of the human spirit and the ability to recover from profound trauma. Ultimately, the case reminds us that true love is built on respect, trust, and mutual support, never accompanied by control. threats, or violence.